We set that 12.5% target about 5 years ago, and this was before there was a SAF mandate in Europe. So the Fit for 55 legislation hadn't been published yet. And at the time, we weren't seeing the level of production come on stream, and a clear marker was needed to be set that buyers of SAF would be there into the future. So through building on and relying on our key suppliers in key regions, we've got access to about 80% of that. But I think there's still elements of that are going to be at risk just because the SAF market probably hasn't developed in Europe in the way we maybe thought it would back 5 years ago. So I think challenges definitely are going to arise as we go and try and meet that target.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying. On this show, I speak with aviation leaders, innovators, and policymakers driving real action, separating the signal from the noise to spotlight what's truly moving the industry forward. The same focus that is at the heart of our new book, Sustainability in the Air, Volume 2. In it, Dirk Singer and I take stock of how far the industry has come and how far we still need to go. With the global carbon budget potentially running out by 2032, the clock is ticking. But the most promising solutions today aren't just environmentally sound, they are economically superior as well. From SAF and contrail mitigation to direct air capture, the book offers a practical roadmap for aviation's journey to net zero. Get your copy today. Link in the show notes. My guest today is Stephen Fitzgerald, Director of Sustainability and Finance at Ryanair, Europe's largest low-cost airline. Stephen sits at the intersection of climate policy, fuel markets, and airline economics, overseeing Ryanair's strategy on SAF, EU emissions trading, and fleet efficiency. In this episode, we unpack why Ryanair set SAF targets ahead of the EU mandate, how carbon pricing is shaping airline costs, and what it takes to decarbonize aviation while keeping fares low. Stephen, it's good to be speaking with you and finally having one of the world's leading low-cost airlines on the podcast talking about sustainability, because low-cost airlines typically target growth. Ryanair has been a growth leader globally, a profit leader, and here you are trying to save some carbon footprint while pursuing growth. Do you find yourself in a fix, Stephen?
No, look, I think that's just the nature of operating in Europe now. We're going to be leading on sustainability. We operate in a highly regulated market in the EU where the vast majority of our flights are covered by carbon pricing at a really high level. And we're also covered by SAF mandates. So we're going to be leading on sustainability as well and leading on SAF procurement. So it does feel a bit different to the normal low-cost carrier way of doing things. But I mean, that's just the way we're operating now.
Well, I think you're being a bit humble here because you're not just complying with EU mandates. You've actually set a 12.5% target for SAF usage for 2030, which actually exceeds EU mandates. So contrary to popular belief, surprise, surprise, Ryanair is not ticking a box here. It's actually going beyond. Why?
Yeah, absolutely. So we set that 12.5% target about 5 years ago, and this was before there was a SAF mandate in Europe. So the Fit for 55 legislation hadn't been published yet, but it was because we recognised SAF as the most scalable decarbonisation solution for aviation. And at the time, we weren't seeing the level of production come on stream, and a clear marker was needed to be set that buyers of SAF would be there into the future. So that's a bit of background on why we set that 12.5% target for 2030. Through building on and relying on our key suppliers in key regions, we've got about 80% of that. We've got access to about 80% of that. So that's a good thing. But I think there's still elements of that are going to be at risk just because the SAF market probably hasn't developed in Europe in the way we maybe thought it would back 5 years ago. So I think challenges definitely are going to arise as we go and try and meet that target.
Interesting. One question: why the focus on SAF?
SAF isn't the only thing we're looking at. So we've set a target that's been validated by the SBTI. So that's an emission intensity target to reduce our CO2 per passenger kilometre by 27% by the year 2031. So that's trying to get it down to 48 grams of CO2 per passenger. And if you can think about Ryanair, you think about efficiency. So we're already leading in that space already. So SAF will deliver about 50% of those emission savings. But fleet renewal plays a huge part as well. And we were only in a position to set that SBTI target when we had completed our order for 300 MAX 10 aircraft. And so those aircraft are going to be used part for growth, but also part for fleet renewal. So retiring older aircraft. And the MAX 10 should be able to deliver a 20% fuel saving while being able to transport 20% more passengers. So it's kind of getting a double whammy benefits there in terms of our intensity target. So that was one key thing. So SAF being a drop in fuel, no infrastructure changes needed at airports. That was all part of why SAF is going to play an important role. But I mean, when I think about it now, there's lots of other projects that will help us decarbonize. So like we're retrofitting our 737 NG fleet with split scimitar winglets. We're looking at variable cost index. Instead of setting a fixed speed, it will take into account the engines on a particular aircraft and weather conditions. We're going to increase our use of GPUs on the ground. And we're not going to be installing Wi-Fi's on planes. With drag obviously happening.
Yes, we heard that across multiple news outlets, and there was a rather famous person kind of upset with Ryanair that you will not introduce Wi-Fi on board, free Wi-Fi.
Free Wi-Fi. No, again, it all comes down to the focus that Ryanair has on fuel efficiency. We have a sustainability committee that meets monthly that has the key people across the group. So CFO, CTO, COO are all playing a part in terms of looking at fuel efficiency. When we consider different projects, including things like Wi-Fi and planes, the fuel cost and additional fuel burn plays a part in any decision making. So that was one of the things that was considered with that.
So I sense a theme here, Stephen, which once again is very aligned with the LCC ethos, the Ryanair ethos, which is let's bring down the fuel burn per seat down, the intensity you mentioned, right? How does this balance with, the carbon intensity versus the total emission of a flight or total emission of Ryanair? How do you balance that growth? Because the airline's growth curve is usually faster than the fuel intensity decline curve.
I think it will. I think that's going to remain into the future. I think what Ryanair has come through over the last few years is double-digit increases in terms of growth on an annual basis, and you're not going to see the same declines in terms of emission intensity. What we can see is that as SAF mandates increase across Europe, there will come a tipping point when we will be able to reduce our CO2 per passenger at a fast rate, and that's coming up. That's coming towards the end of the decade as we increase our use of SAF. It is a really interesting play between navigating the cost premium of SAF and maintaining the low cost carrier model. I think maybe to put it all in context, I mean, right now, like scene setting on Ryanair, we'll use about 5.5 million tons of jet fuel in a given year, and we'll be flying to 36 countries and 220 different airports, right? And so 90% of our flights are covered by ETS. So we're going to expect next year to spend between 1.4 and 1.5 billion trying to comply with the emission trading system and SAF costs. So there's a huge cost burden there for Ryanair, and for a family of four flying on a return trip from Dublin to the Canaries, it's going to cost an additional €120. and maybe to again put that in context, if that family chose to fly to Morocco instead of the Canaries, I mean, they're not going to be paying any of these costs. So it's an interesting play that needs to be considered in the context of how we think about compliance costs with ETS and SAF. And again, we've seen the price of EUAs increase 50% in the last 9 months. And look, this is actually primarily through speculative investment funds rather than compliance fundamentals. Um, and like really what we're seeing now is that there was an EUA auction last week, and I think there was 9.2 million tons of CO2 being auctioned. The speculative buyers wanted 10.4 million tons. So that's a challenge as a low cost carrier that we're always trying to play against. And ETS costs are about 14 times the cost of CORSIA. So at least with CORSIA, you're buying environmental projects. But with ETS, some governments might invest that in the environment, but not a lot do. And like we have the example with Ireland where the government uses the revenues generated from ETS to put it into Bus Air and so put it into a kind of semi-state owned bus company. So you're not getting environmental benefits that you could actually point to like you can with CORSIA. So there's a challenge here where you're trying to minimize your compliance costs, but also maximize the sustainability benefits that you can achieve. So the link between ETS and SAF is a bit clearer these days because the EU has what's called the FEETS mechanism, and that provides SAF ETS allowances. So where you're picking up SAF at a European airport, you're going to get SAF ETS allowances back. So that's a play that we can try and reduce our ETS compliance costs while also increasing our use of SAF. And we just need to be really smart about where we choose to get the SAF, what type of SAF we're going to pick up, because that all plays back to what real benefit can we get here? How much of the carbon emission reductions can we really achieve? And try and do it in a super smart way to reduce costs and maximize benefits.
I love it. Thank you. That was ETS 101, ETS compliance 101. I really appreciate how you explained it. I think you've been very proactive in addressing this in the actual execution of the strategy as well. You and I last met at the Catagen launch in Belfast in person, which is a e-fuels supplier based out of Northern Ireland. Now, they're not the only one you're partnering with. If you've got the entire plethora from Shell to others, tell me, how are you thinking about this ecosystem and specifically about Catagen, which is sort of a newish player, isn't it?
Yeah, Catagen's a super interesting one. They've got a novel idea where you'd be able to generate SAF generated from biomass. And you're able to do it at various locations across closer to the ecosystem where we really benefit from. So closer to renewable energy and closer to airports that you operate from. So I think it was the novel idea that came about from Catagen is super interesting, especially when we're looking at a market that's super short on 2G and 3G SAF, that we need more of these innovative ideas. And I think that's what Catagen can be. And we were first introduced to Catagen through the research that's actually being performed by Trinity College in Dublin. So Trinity College operate a role as IATA's pre-certification screening tool. So Catagen were one of the first to go through that. So any new SAF candidates will have to go through a process where pre-screening is done. So I think there was a really good link in between research that we sponsored and what we're hearing about what Catagen can actually produce. So it's going to be a new way of doing things, I think, where potentially you could mix it with other companies, where you could potentially produce and blend closer to the airports. And again, that should produce carbon emission reduction benefits. But in terms of the kind of wider ecosystem of companies that we're dealing with, we really focused at looking across our key markets and see who were the early movers, who were the market leaders on SAF. And I think of when we chose to partner with some, it looked like we focused on three real things. One was credibility. Does the fuel supplier have a strong track record in renewable fuels? So the road fuel space has been dealing with this for a long time. Second criteria we probably considered was scale and the link back to our network. So when I think of Anylive in Italy, Italy is our biggest market, and Anylive are the biggest SAF producer in that market and our biggest supplier of conventional aviation fuel. So it's a natural link to pair up with them. And then the third element would probably be ambition. So when we've looked at these deals, we've looked at multiple pathways being explored. So we're not just limited to FSF, 2G and 3G SAF are going to be part of these roadmaps, and these are what the suppliers want to do as well. So I think those three elements were key when choosing who to partner with. I think the diversification also reduces supply risk, fosters competition in terms of pricing as the market matures, but we haven't really seen that yet.
I love the mix here. I love how you're focusing not just on mature players producing today, like or who can help the world fuel services, but also betting on those with big potential, like Catagen. Catagen, of course, is a very good case study that came out of the Trinity College Dublin. You have a partnership with them too, if I'm not wrong. Tell me about this research into the SAP certification process that you're working with on Trinity College with.
Yeah, so research that's being performed there, I think, is really important. It's going to be powerful. It's I think it's going to benefit the entire industry. It's not going to just help Ryanair. Um, in terms of this specific piece on SAF certification, one of the biggest, I think, the most significant barrier to entry for new SAF candidates is the specification approval. So the process of approval can be expensive. It's a long one. It's a huge cost involved. The volume of fuel required is high, and the time for approval can mean there's certain potential SAF candidates that will just pull out of it because they'll just favor using their product for less challenging and lower risk markets. So what Trinity's pre-certification tools can do is they can predict viscosity, density, surface tension of SAF candidates within a 5% threshold using only 1 gram of SAF. So that avoids the needs and huge costs to generate huge amounts of SAF to go through the certification process. So what it does is it de-risks the process for new SAF candidates. It enables a lower barrier to entry, and I think that will help accelerate SAF production. I think the benefits will flow to the industry when the need for 2G and 3G SAF intensifies, because 1G SAF is already de-risked. But that's where the link back to, as I said, the Belfast-based company Catagen comes in. So they were one of the first, I think the first company to go through the pre-screening process for the SAF that's, as I say, produced by biohydrogen, biogenic carbon dioxide from waste biomass. Yeah. So look, I think it's really important work. But it's not the only thing that Trinity are looking at with us. They really do have some of the best-in-class research going on there. So one of the other things on the SAF side is they're looking at the study of carbon life cycle analysis, and that's across the entire value chain. So I think if you're looking at bringing SAF in huge distances, so if you're taking SAF from Asia or feedstocks coming in huge distances to meet European mandates, I think the work that they'll do will give a real view on the environmental impact of that SAF. It will look at cradle to grave life cycle emissions. So I think that's super important as well.
Very, very interesting. Usually, I'm quite hard on airlines working with universities, and I feel that they're just kicking the can down the road. Let's just do research and let's not do other things. But here, I think it's quite commendable. I believe your commitment with this Trinity College Research Center now totals 2.5 million euros through till 2030. Is that right?
It will actually be 4 million by 2030. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's significant. And I'm just very curious. How do you pitch this internally? Because I know the culture within the LCC. You got to see an ROI, and you're saying, "Hey, I'm going to fund this research center for 4 million euros." I don't know the ROI. You got to be saving more than 4 million euros, or you got to be making more than 4 million euros there.
I think it's a longer term play, and look, to be honest, I think this research has already paid for itself, given the role that Trinity has at EASA in terms of bringing new SAF candidates on. Like when you think about what our fuel bill will be next year, in the billions, I think it's a really small investment which could pay back huge dividends. It will benefit, as I say, the entire ecosystem: airlines, airports, fuel suppliers, fuel producers, app producers. I think everyone will benefit on the back of the research that's being conducted there. And yeah, it's a small cost that will pay back big when the SAF mandates kick up, and 2G SAF becomes part of the mandates from in the UK from 2027, and in Europe, 3G coming in later in 2030.
Thank you. I once again appreciate the perspective there. You, of course, have a background managing fuel price exposure. Yet, the cost of SAF between 1G, 2G versus 3G varies dramatically. How do you navigate the cost premium of SAF while ensuring that you're not turning away passengers? You're talking about how much euros it can add per ticket.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just the markets that we're operating in. So when you think about Ryanair, it's EU, UK that we're predominantly operating in. And I think the mandated SAF market operates very differently to the voluntary market. So we do an annual tender process where 40 suppliers will look to win volumes at the 220 airports that we fly from. And so they'll come to us. We're typically agnostic as part of the mandated markets as to the type of SAF, but with some key caveats which I'll touch on. But the mandated 2% SAF can be delivered across the year on a mass balance basis, which means it doesn't need to be delivered to any airport that we fly from, strangely enough, right? But it's absolutely key for us that the supplier is delivering the SAF to an airport that we operate from. And it sounds really basic, but that's the way it is. And then we get into the supplier credentials and what they're looking at in terms of their SAF production. Are they an early mover? Have they secured their supply of SAF yet? Where's it sourced? What does pricing look like? What documentation will we receive? Are they even listed on ISCC, the certification body, to be able to issue documentation? So that's the first consideration that we'll make. And so typically that will be for HEFA SAF. But we're not seeing 2G and 3G SAF come on board yet. But we wanted to, because going back to the point that I made on Feats offers you a benefit here when you pick up more advanced types of SAF. So the more advanced type of SAF you get, the bigger the benefit you ultimately receive. So because we operate under EU ETS, if we pick up third generation SAF, so power to liquid SAF, we'll receive 95% of the price differential back. So we really have to engage our fuel suppliers, understand where they are with their development, understand when they can get production online, and really 3G SAF, we're only seeing it in test right now. 2G SAF is slightly different, but still not really at the levels where you could point it and say deliver huge quantities to a particular airport. So the decision to go with 1G, 2G, 3G SAF and my role within finance will come back to where can we get these types of SAF delivered by the most credible SAF partner at the most cost-effective price to the right location in the markets that we operate from.
I want to double click on that 95% back, of if you invest in 3G SAF right now. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe there's a limited fund, and the faster you go apply for it, the sooner you get that. And once it runs out, it runs out. So does that mean, would you advise airlines to go sign for e-fuels and 3G SAF right away? Is there an incentive here?
Well, you have to so you're absolutely right, as you normally are. There's 20 million allowances that run out by the end of the decade, but when they're used, they're used. So I was surprised actually last year in 2024 to see the quantum of those Feat SAF allowances, the amount that were actually claimed and used. It shocked me in the year before.
How much are they used? I'm guessing that this is public data.
It's public data, but there was hundreds of thousands used.
Hundreds of thousands, then it's 20 million.
Yeah, exactly. So
there's nothing. That means airlines are not yet acting or don't know about that.
Well, they can't get the 3G SAF to really take advantage of it. I think that's why one of the points that we would advocate for is if you really want to spur SAF development and super and turbocharge SAF, um, something needs to be done on the feeds piece, which is, can it get extended and can it get expanded? So can you put more focus on the 3G SAF to really scale it? Can you give extend the allowances out to 2040, and really make it that the airlines wouldn't be put at a real disadvantage if they moved early themselves and locked in um, with a SAF producer on a multi-year agreement, because I think that's going to stop airlines from doing certain offtakes they they don't know the price, they don't know if they'll be out of pocket, but if they did have a backstop in knowing that feeds would be there to support them, I think that could really turbocharge SAF production.
One clarification here: these allowances, do you get them back when the first drop of SAF goes in the wing, or do you get them back when you order it?
No, you get them back even later than that. You get them back the year after you submit your ETS submission. So if I pick up e-fuels in 2025, I have to wait until third quarter of 26 to get the benefit back.
But do you still pay the EU ETS fee first upfront and then you get a refund? Is this like a cashback scheme?
Yeah. Look, the ETS works as a cap trade. You have to buy the allowances and have them in advance, and then you'll be able to benefit the following year with the SAF ETS allowances, reducing your exposure the following year.
Wow, this has been a masterclass, by the way, in EU ETS pricing. So I'm so happy I'm speaking to someone who knows fuel pricing in depth here, which is why I didn't mind running now. Just for context, when I do have an airline CEO or an airport CEO on this podcast, it's much more strategic and much more high level than I envision. So I'm loving this conversation where we can actually, peel back some of these layers and dive a little deeper.
Good.
Um, it's great to see Ryanair turbocharging the use of SAF. You're getting in early, the incentives that are there, you're making this work. But what tough choices do you believe the industry must make to actually turbocharge SAF development? Is it just about airlines signaling by buying SAF? Is that enough, or do you think more needs to be done?
More definitely needs to be done. I think outside of the extension of feeds, the pace of new SAF production capacity in Europe probably hasn't been there. So governments need to step in, and I think there's an early movers coalition which was announced last year, which is meant to help accelerate the use of third generation SAF. So hopefully that's one thing that can really step in, and help get that up and running, because it's really not there at the minute. But targeted reliefs for feedstock, I think, are another way that the governments could step in to help. I think in general, there's been a bit of market paralysis. So SAF suppliers have paused certain investments. Plans haven't been getting to FID. Some of this, I think, has been brought about by a wait and see approach to the use of the revenue certainty mechanism. So the UK announced a revenue certainty mechanism, which would be kind of a body that would sit in the middle between producers and off-takers, and they'd help guarantee producers' revenues to get them to a final investment decision. The EU has now started looking at a similar system. But in reality, what can happen is that, well, nobody wants to lock in and engage on a long offtake agreement, because they'll wait and see, well, what would the cost be through the revenue certainty mechanism. So I think SAF pricing is going to remain stubbornly high unless we see something take place there. I also think that while the market is long FSF right now, I think it could turn short. And I think that's going to be due to mandates starting in other jurisdictions, which will just put pressure on the amount of SAF being produced and being able to get delivered to the EU. And then there's also certain regulatory rules coming in around anti-dumping directive in Europe, which is going to prevent SAF coming in from outside Europe coming in. So there's certain things that the EU could look at to prevent, to help accelerate SAF coming into the market, and help bring limited production capacity online.
I appreciate you bringing this perspective in because I did want to get your thoughts on policy. What do you think is the best policy measure that works for the entire ecosystem? Is it the Refuel EU ETS mandate? Is it the UK revenue guarantee? Or is there a third, better, ideal case scenario you would like?
Um, I think, when I think of the refuel mandate, I mean, that's a clear signal. Like, airlines have to pick it up. There's a customer on the end of it, and 100% of the cost from the fuel supplier gets passed on to the airlines. Airlines can't pass on all that cost, right? So you think for a fuel supplier, Refuel EU should be the perfect policy to really help scale production because there's somebody on the other end of it. But it just hasn't happened. We've seen investments being paused. And even when I think of ESAF, I mean, like, Europe again should be a really favorable location to start e-fuel production because the mandates have high penalties, there's a clean electricity grid there, and there's a customer base that has to get it. So it's a strange one why refuel has almost paused certain types of SAF production. And I think maybe it comes back to how unrealistic the longer term SAF goals might be within the policy. The revenue certainty mechanism, I think I can't really talk to it until it goes live, and it's not going live until in sometime in 2026. But I think that could really help spur growth because it de-risks the investment for the SAF producer. There's a bit of price clarity as well, which is key for airlines. If we're going about trying to plan costs and minimize risk, that will help. So I think the revenue certainty mechanism, I think, is a wait and see, but it could be something really positive to help spur some growth.
Very good. Once again, I appreciate the clarity here you're providing in these policies. We have spoken a lot about SAF, but going back to that research at Trinity College, I believe they're also researching zero carbon propulsion as well as non CO2 emissions for you, especially the latter can be acted on today. So, how do these technologies factor into the overall mix for the decarbonization roadmap for Ryanair?
Look, I think continuing to advance research on zero propulsion is needed. It doesn't feed into our roadmaps. So when I think of scalable solutions for commercial airlines, I think it's going to take a lot longer to get zero propulsion in the mix there, given there's constraints at airports, there's huge complexity, and I'm talking about with hydrogen, the need to carry 4 times the space, and for, say, battery operated, the extra weight that those batteries would need. But I think it's important to really kickstart the research that goes into it. Um, Again, just when I think about what they're looking at, it's how different types of propulsion types and airframe technologies could be incorporated into an aircraft fleet, what the fuel consumption would look like, and what that would do for climate impact. So I think the research will be needed, and what we do is we'll give real world flight planning analysis, how the schedule could be optimized for a multi propulsion fleet. So you could have part of a fleet running on SAF, battery for a mixed fleet doing shorter sectors, and hydrogen as well. So it is interesting work that I think could form part of planning towards the end of the century, but it's not something that we take into account when we look at our own decarbonisation roadmap right now. On the non-CO2 side, I mean, this year we're submitting data as part of Europe's non-CO2 monitoring, reporting and verification. Um, I think there'll be a playoff in the future, and that playoff is: do you fly longer and burn more fuel and CO2 to avoid airspace and the potential generation of uh, contrails? So minimizing the overall climate impact and how that could be worked into your flight planning systems, I think, is a really interesting challenge for the industry. But before you consider start changing a flight plan, I think you'd want to be sure that the formation of contrails can be predicted reliably And that's some of the work that Trinity are going to be undertaking. So again, this is like live research, I think, that could benefit the industry.
Fair enough. And thanks for being honest and open, because one of the realities is that the bedrock of Ryanair's operation is the 737, right? And the number of these planes is increasing, their fuel efficiency is improving, but that's your workhorse, right? And that's not changing overnight. That's not changing till 2050. I would say that still remains a workhorse. So I see why your focus is where it is, and I think that's important. Um, let's talk a little about marketing. Ryanair is known for its brand. Ryanair is known for its quirky branding and leveraging on what's going on right now. But what's interesting is you've received ESG ratings of A and A minus from MSCI and CDP respectively. Are these important? How do these external validations influence your overall strategy? Is this effective when it comes to marketing and brand?
Well, one correction, we're up to an A with CDP now as well, so some further upgrades there. I don't think they're important from a marketing perspective that much. I think they're important for investors, as opposed to maybe us changing the way we do things internally. For me, they're really about transparency in what we're doing. And look, that's been a theme across Europe. So we're required to report under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and that requires our financial auditors to review and audit our sustainability data. So I think it gives confidence. I think it gives some credibility to our sustainability strategy, and that it's science aligned. I think the key questions that I get are around from investors now are around emission intensity trajectory. What's our SAF adoption rate? These are the type of things that investors are really focused on. I don't think the customer base is as focused on that right now. We had offered certain things on the booking platform, like offsetting, and it really didn't get the traction that you think it might have received. So for me, the work that we do in terms of our ESG rating engagements is for investors to have a real, transparent, and credible view of what we're doing to really set ourselves apart from the competition and all the good things that we're doing right that the investors would expect of somebody that they're invested in.
Fair enough. So it's much more of an investor relations play than a marketing or brand play.
Exactly. Yeah. And sorry, just going back to on marketing as well. I mean, we've a one-man marketing team in our CEO. So I mean, that's all the support that's needed there. It's not something else that's needed on the sustainability side.
Fair enough. Looking towards 2030, what regulatory or market developments do you think will have the biggest impact on your ability to achieve or exceed that 12.5% SAF target?
Yeah, look, I think there's a difficult road to get there. And as I said, I think that while the market is long right now at present, I think it could turn short for SAF. So the key drivers for me will be the pace of new SAF production capacity in Europe. And partly linked to that is just feedstock availability, and then the competition from other markets outside of Europe and where we operate from in order to be able to achieve that. Not to hammer home on this point too much, but I think the extension of SAF ETS allowances through feeds will also be key, because if Europe enhanced this, if they allowed all SAF purchases to be, say, a direct reduction in ETS exposure, I think it could really scale SAF towards 2030. I mean, we'll continue to prepare through our close engagements with the SAF suppliers. As I say, I talked to 40 fuel suppliers in a given moment, and then the regulators to remove kind of barriers to what we're seeing in terms of barriers to SAF production.
Fair enough. I think that's really good. Is there anything that Ryanair is doing that's unique and innovative in sustainability that we've actually not spoken about?
I mean, it all comes down to fuel being the biggest cost for an airline, and with the low cost model, fuel is actually a higher percentage of your cost. So we do so many things to try and just reduce our cost burden. So where we do self-handling, And we do self-handling across Dublin, across all of Spain, all of Portugal, Stansted, so key locations. We are moving more and more to electric ground equipment. I think that's a key part of the ecosystem. So it's maybe not entirely unique, but we're talking and looking at emissions across the entire spectrum. And then in terms of how we get to the cockpit, pilots have iPads. There's no big flight logs going on. It's all electric. We're talking about reducing cost. We get up-to-date weather patterns to help make sure that we're taking the optimum amount of fuel at any given point in time. And flight plans are refreshed frequently, so we know exactly that we're taking the optimum amount of fuel. We're looking at even moving to get moving to an e-handshake solution. So we're able to monitor how much the suppliers are actually putting on board on a more granular level to make sure that it's completely optimized. So I mean, there's lots of innovative things that we'll continue to look at to reduce our fuel consumption.
Fantastic. The final part of this interview is the rapid fire round, in which we get to know you, Stephen, a bit more personally. I'm sure you've heard this on the podcast
I have
previously from other guests. So we'll start with something simple. What's your favorite airport?
at Dublin Airport.
Okay, easy. Why is that?
Look, I've good memories of going through there. Expectation of holidays. Yeah, good fun.
Okay. Do you know the fun fact? Dublin Airport is the only airport in the world with its own brand of whiskey, if I'm not wrong, which you cannot get
Wasn't
anywhere.
aware of that.
Yeah, you can get it at the duty free. They don't have it anywhere else.
Very good. I'm not going to try it.
Well, that might be something for Ryanair passengers. You never know. Favorite movie?
The Departed.
Good choice. Love it. Favorite city?
New York. I used to live out that way. Love it. Yeah.
Okay. Favorite airline that's not Ryanair?
See, I don't fly too often outside of our network. I mean, we've just got such good choice. I mean, there's 3,500 different routes. So look, I'm going to have to pass on that one.
Good play there. Do you have a favorite book?
Yeah, Golf is Not a Game of Perfect by Dr. Bob. I need it. I read it often.
Is it about golf?
It is about golf.
You must be an avid golfer then. That's that's my next question. What do you do in your free time?
Yeah, golf. Yeah, golfing and acting as a taxi driver. But yeah, golfing. Yeah.
Acting as a taxi driver for your kids, I'm supposing.
Yes, at the
Yeah.
weekends. Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
I hear you. I was like, is he moonlighting as an Uber driver here? You know.
It's not that bad in Ryanair.
What is something you'd like to learn, Stephen?
I think a new language. Yeah,
Okay. Do you know or speak Gaelic?
I do. Yeah, and I can. I think I need to get French or German for when I have to engage with regulators on trying to build out on SAF and enhance SAF production. So I think that could be a good one to get.
Mm-hmm. What is the best advice you've received?
Don't pull the ladder up with you.
Nice. I love it. Okay, that's deep. And finally, if we are speaking 1 year from now and we are popping champagne, what are we celebrating?
I think it would be Ryanair taking as much SAF as anyone globally in 2026.
Wow, love it. I love the ambition. Let's track the numbers, and I think you're on your way on this journey. Congratulations for coming this far and all of your technically in-depth answers. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Appreciate your time, Shashank. Good to talk.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp, Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simpliflying, that's simply with an I.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simpliflying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simpliflying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our Supervising Editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Meera Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Ligia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimen is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simpliflying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.